Hi, this is Jeff Davis, creator of the hit television show Teen Wolf, and you're listening to Diminishing Returns.
It started as writing, and right from the beginning you knew this was different. Because it was happening in small villages, market towns. And then it wasn't on the TV anymore. It was in the street outside. It was coming through your windows. It was a virus, an infection. By the time they tried to evacuate the cities, it was already too late. The infection was everywhere. The day before the TV and radio stopped broadcasting, there were reports of infection in Paris and New York. I didn't hear anything more after that.
Hi everyone, welcome to Diminishing Returns. It is Halloween. Early.
It's not Halloween.
It is, it's Christmas, Alan. They've got mince pies in the supermarket already. I'm fine with that. We've pretty much had that on this show. Historically, it's been Halloween is October. October is horror month, where we talk about horror films non-stop. And that's just because we tend to tie our episodes into new releases coming out in the cinema where we can. And in October, they're all horror films. Now, this year, the year of coronavirus, it's obviously not something we've been doing nearly as much because there's nothing coming out. But we thought, fuck it, we'll just do a big 3-part horror Halloween special anyway.
Well, let's set this up right. Let's introduce ourselves first. So I'm Alan. That person over there is Saul.
Hello.
He's the mental zombie fan.
Yes, you are, of course, listening to Diminishing Returns.
Yes.
That special intro, by the way, was, of course, put together for us by the one, the only Tomo Fallows.
Yeah, it's very nice.
So thanks again, Tomo.
This is part one of a three-episode look at zombie films, specifically kind of George A. Romero's.
It's George A. Romero's Of the Dead franchise. Night of the Living Dead. They're often just called The Dead movies, but obviously that's a very generic sounding name. So specifically, we are looking at Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, Survival of the Dead. We will also be covering a few offshoots and remakes and things. That trilogy, I think I'm correct in saying the only trilogy to be entirely remade with separate remakes that have no continuity between one another. It's quite an odd distinction. But yeah, in order to kind of do it justice, because this franchise is often seen as a trilogy. It was a trilogy for 20 years before they went back to it. We've decided to split it into an episode looking at Night of the Living Dead, which is this week, an episode looking at Dawn of the Dead, and an episode looking at Day of the Dead. And so we didn't have all these extra films at the end, making the last episode massive. We've decided to cover the Romero movies in chronological order of their continuity. So the order in which the story happens.
What I want to establish, for people who are not regular listeners, is how mental Saul is, and that he is not just a massive zombie fan, possibly the biggest zombie expert on this channel right now.
I think it's fair to say, obviously Calvin is known
the number one Bond YouTube expert.
Exactly, he's James Bond expert, Calvin Dyson. I don't think it's ridiculous to say. I think it's fair to say I am of a comparative level of knowledge with regards to zombie movies and zombie cinema. It is my specialist subject, but I haven't capitalized on it in any real way, shape, or form. Yes. So specifically, we are covering the George A. Romero Dead movies, as we've said. This week, we will be looking at Night of the Living Dead and the hundreds of thousands of remakes of Night of the Living Dead that exist. A couple of weeks ago, we covered Murder on the Orient Express, and Alan went away and watched the hundreds of thousands of adaptations of that book. No. Look, we all
I
watched
watched
the
3 more
74.
than you guys did. So.
Yeah, we all watched the Sidney Lumet film and the Kenneth Branagh film, but Alan went away and watched 3 other versions so he could report back like a little book report, and that's what we're doing this week. I've watched these additional. For anyone who doesn't know, Night of the Living Dead. Essentially, they forgot to put the little copyright symbol on the end credits, the distributor, back in the 60s. And it immediately lapsed into the public domain as a result. I still don't quite understand how that works, because my understanding of licensing law is that you own the copyright over something automatically, but I guess in the 60s it perhaps didn't work that way. But essentially, Night of the Living Dead is in the public domain, so we can remake it right now on this podcast if we want.
Ooh.
We can definitely drop some unlicensed audio clips in here and don't have to pay for it. Not obviously, we normally pay for all our clips that we use on this show.
Please support us on Patreon.
The point is, anyone can remake Night of the Living Dead, and they seem to have latched on to that around the point that digital filming technology meant that anyone could pick up a camera and make a film. So about the year 2000, roughly. I don't know if you know, but Night of the Living Dead was originally conceived of as a sort of dumb comedy. George A. Romero, John A. Russo, is that his name? John Russo. They're the 2 main people involved, but there were a number of people they pulled in, and they were just coming up with something they could make, and it was largely written around what they had available to work with. For example, there's a scene in Night of the Living Dead with a kind of official government person being interviewed, and they have a nice fancy car, and that was written in just because their mate had this car, and they were like, oh, we could put a couple of flags on your car and say it's the president's car. Brilliant, done. It really was that kind of grassroots, a bunch of guys just pulling a film together on a shoestring. I do like that kind of story.
I like that, especially when it's the odd occasion like this when it's done well.
Yes.
And it kind of rises above. It's not just some idiots doing so. It's people who obviously know how to put a film together. But then I guess it's similar to, say, what Sam Raimi does early in his stuff. It's like they don't quite know all the rules, and so they don't follow the rules. And so you end up getting... But if they've got a good visual idea or a good creative mind or whatever, they make something that works, but it works in a way that you've not really seen before.
So they wrote the film, and it was called Monster Flick, to give you an idea of how seriously they were taking it. And it was about some aliens who came to Earth, befriended some teenagers. Somewhere along the way, it seemed to become more horror focused than comedy, and it involved a sequence involving a load of reanimated human corpses that were used for food by the aliens. I don't quite know how that worked, but they decided it would be recently dead only purely because of budgetary reasons, with having people come out of the ground and the special effects involved. And it was John A. Russo's idea that they would eat flesh as well. They would be cannibalistic. So kind of his doing, really, not George A. Romero, as much as George A. Romero is the man remembered for the zombie as we know it. And I think, like I say, largely due to production reasons more than anything, that turned into Night of the Living Dead, which is not only, not a horror comedy, but it's quite starkly, I would say, the most serious film in the entire series. George A. Romero has a sense of humour, and it comes across in the sequels to this film, but I don't think it really has any humour about it, this film. It's
I agree.
Bleak film, and I think that's partly born out of the time in which it's made. These films are renowned for being a snapshot of an era, and George A. Romero kind of commenting on the world at the time, and I don't think I really was aware of it when I was younger to the extent that I am now, but Night of the Living Dead is so of the Vietnam War. It's a bunch of people who've gone off to Vietnam and seen horrible things, and quite literally in Tom Savini's case, he was a war photographer. Is that right, Alan? We were talking about this the other day.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Savini, of course, did the makeup for the film. Yeah, I just think aesthetically, the film has a real gritty documentary feel about it, which I think must be from watching all these, newsreels of Vietnam atrocities going on at the time.
I did note that, considering like the low budget nature or almost very limited equipment or whatever, they do manage to make it feel quite cinematic.
Oh,
and it's just the way it's shot, like, little Dutch angles shooting from the ground up, lots of little things like that are not overused, doesn't feel gimmicky, and then sometimes going in for this real sort of tight close up, making it feel very claustrophobic.
Yeah,
but it really all works. And
I think your comparison to Sam Raimi is quite apt, because there are sequences where the film goes out of focus. There are a couple of instances where they jump cut, I think, in the middle of a shot. Like it is messily put together in certain ways. But then the composition of the shots and the lighting, like that side of the cinematography, not the technical aspect of it, but the more artistically driven, is remarkable. This is it. It's got the makings of an incredibly cheesy, silly film, but I think it largely plays sincerely as intended, with maybe a couple of exceptions. And I suppose any shortcomings on that front are down to the performances more than anything, because they're working with they're working with unknown actors. But all things considered, I think they've got a pretty good cast here. Dwayne Jones is the lead, playing Ben, who was a notable casting decision. I mean, this is another reason why I love George A. Romero, and it's really cemented for me on rewatching all these films. Is the guy was such a fucking hippie beatnik. He was just a guy of the 60s riding this wave of revolution. And this film and, his filmography, it's all about, like, revolution, man. But he has landed on the right side of history with pretty much everything, like, really firmly. Dwayne Jones is, of course, a black man who plays Ben. Night of the Living Dead, therefore, has a black protagonist, which was almost unheard of in 1968.
It's basically unheard of now.
Yeah, certainly for a film that isn't about the plight of the black man or what have you. Like, it's nothing. It's just a man who happens to be black who's in this film, and they've said as much. They wrote the character as a white man, not really thinking about it. Dwayne Jones was just the best guy who turned up to audition, and they hired him. But the fact that you
can tell that though, you can tell that it's not
completely
written. Because there would be numerous references to it. The way the other characters would interact with him would be different. You can tell it's not written into the script like that.
Yeah, he never says anything like, he never says we don't want your kind around here or anything like that, or your kind can't be trusted, which would have been the obvious sort of division to put there. It's just two people. But then the fact that they cast Dwayne Jones and didn't go back and change it and were like, no, this is, on a human level, that says something. So I think, arguably, there's definitely politics to it, but the ending specifically, I think, is often misread as a specifically racial thing. And I think it's perhaps more about the atrocities of war in a general sense.
I definitely felt like that. You put a white man in that part, and the film does not change. Like I don't think it is saying anything about that. The fact that you put a black man in his lead role of a film, protagonist of the film at that time, is saying something.
Well, like I say, it's more loaded now in the current climate than it has ever been, I would say, because it's happening on a daily basis where innocent black people are being shot dead for basically no reason, and it's just people shooting first before they take a second to ascertain what the situation is. And that's what this is at the end. It's these people just shoot without taking a second to check what they're doing. And I think it's an incredibly powerful, fantastic ending. But
Plus, then, to a large extent, and you see this in some of the other films as well, the zombies themselves are something of a MacGuffin. It's just something to trap these people together so they have to butt heads and deal with each other, deal with a common threat.
Well, that is the and we're hardly covering new ground by saying this, but that is pretty much the thesis of the George A. Romero films. The real monster is man. The zombies aren't a threat. If everyone worked together, it wouldn't be a problem. But you've got to be worried about the other people you encounter along the way, and they're the real issue. And that gets explored in a variety of ways across this franchise. But yeah. Oh,
hello?
Someone at the door?
Oh, God.
It's a bit early for that, isn't it, Alan? Right. Let me just,
usually rings the bell.
Let me just go... Hello?
Hang on, there's no one at the door.
There's no one there, Alan.
Oh, God. The knock was coming from inside the house.
I'm in here.
What?
That's very strange. What is happening?
Oh, get your foot off the hatch, Alan.
Oh, God.
Oh, what? It wasn't the front door. It was the
hatch to the basement.
It was the hatch that Alan was stood on, so I
Calvin.
couldn't
Oh
get
my God.
out. Hello.
Calvin. What are you
Calvin,
doing?
what are you doing here? I almost hit you with this chair leg on fire that I have.
I heard noises, and I just hid in here. I didn't realise it was you.
What, you didn't think to come up and check we were okay or anything?
We could have been being attacked by a Japanese bomb.
Yeah. Well, I'm here now. So, what were you talking about?
Coincidentally enough, weirdly enough, we're talking about Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, that's interesting. I watched that recently, and I think I overheard parts of your conversation that I just assumed was zombies talking about Night of the Living Dead, so I can seamlessly join in.
Oh, God. What an amazing transition.
I didn't know we had a hatch.
Yeah, I didn't even know
that's
we
a
had a
nice
basement. How long has that been down there?
Yeah.
Have you got an injured child in there with you, Calvin?
I listen in from there when you've got other guests on.
Oh,
That's where I stay.
Well, now you're here, Calvin.
Yes.
Would you like to join in the conversation? We're talking about
Thank you.
zombie films.
Sounds good.
Well, we've already done the preamble. We're talking about Night of the Living Dead now. You're going to have to jump straight in.
That's fine.
So, can we focus in a little bit? Let's talk about this film and kind of look at some scenes specifically, because I want to get down to it. So, one of my first notes was that one of the zombies picks up a brick and uses it to smash the car window, which is immediately like, that's more kind of intelligence tool use than I think of as zombies. Like, I think zombies as very kind of don't know what they're doing at all.
You, Alan, spoke about how this is quite a messy film and they hadn't figured out the rules yet. You were talking, of course, about the rules of filmmaking, but they also hadn't figured out the rules of zombies yet. They obviously they were inventing zombies as we know them. So in this film, they do think and reason and use tools. And that first zombie is pretty fast on his feet. He's basically running. By Dawn of the Dead, the next one, they kind of establish a bit firmly what zombies are. They're slow and shambolic and they don't really work that way. But yeah, the first zombie is smart enough to pick up a rock or a brick or whatever it is to smash a window after realizing it can't get through the glass. And it's pretty fast. And I love that zombie. He's such a creepy looking man. He always reminds me of Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob SquarePants, which is probably a very niche reference.
Okay, my next note, and this is going to lead us on to a bigger issue in the film. My next note was, Barbara does not cope well under pressure.
Okay, so talking about things aging and George A. Romero coming out on the right side of history.
Yeah.
The portrayal of women in this film, the female representation, not great. Because
it's not strong.
there are women in this film.
There's more women than men in our primary group of...
Yeah, it's not an issue of representation in that sense, but Barbara is immediately knocked out from like being anything resembling a useful character. She's hysterical throughout the film, and it does just feel like a very 1960s look at this stupid woman who can't cope with all the carnage. We need the men to come in and
Yeah, one of my other notes is only with an open hand, because he has to give her a little slap just to shake her out of her stupor at one point.
But of course, you know, they basically made a remake that we'll talk about a bit later to like almost atone for these sins. So, you know, I'm not
Well,
gonna
let me tell you what, right, about Barbara. I really like that character. I think it's a character that you don't really see very often in these kinds of films. Someone who's just in total shock and just cannot
I
cope.
completely agree.
And is therefore a big bloody anchor around your neck. There's a scene near at the beginning where it's just Ben and Barbara in the house, and like and this is the great acting performance, like he just cannot hide his contempt for her. First, because she's just not saying anything, he's like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? And then when she starts talking, she's just rabbiting on about like, oh, and then this happened, and this happened, this happened. And he's like, just shut up, love, all right? just like, that's even more annoying. But I really like that because she's a problem. She is an issue for him. Yeah. And it'd be so much easier if she wasn't there. But he does kind of like, okay, well, I better look after her and make sure she's all right.
I do admit I like it insofar as you're right. You don't really see that character very much anymore. Certainly not as the second lead character. Like a hero. If you have that character now, it will usually be someone who's an antagonist, really, rather than someone who's set up as a hero to root for.
Or just the way it'd be played, like someone being hysterical or being just acting out and then having it, but she's just in shock, and it's actually a really good representation of someone in shock. And I like that.
I think it's just unfortunate that she's the one notable, substantial female role in the film, and everyone else is a strong man who's coping with the situation. It
would help if they had other female roles that counterbalanced it. Yeah, but like just as a character, I really liked it, and that there's like, what is it, 30 minutes before the other characters come in? It's just the two of them in the house. There's all this. It's very talky at times, which is really unusual in films. It feels like it really felt like a radio play. A lot of times.
I had the same thought. I did,
because he's talking about where he's come from, but it felt so real. If you just got two people who smashed together and they were like, "Well, what happened? Where did you come from?" And then she's not talking. Oh man, I really liked it. I really loved all that bit. And
there's a point early on where they're talking, and it's the most blatant case I can think of we don't have the budget to film this, so let's just tell this incredible, elaborate story.
Guess the driver must have cut off the road into that gas station by Beekman's Diner. He went right through the billboard, ripped over a gas pump, and never stopped moving. By now it's like a moving bonfire. Didn't know if the truck was going to explode or what.
As I say, I think this film's got a very documentary feel about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's lost in the subsequent films in this series. And I think that makes it feel real. There's no money behind this film. I can't stress that enough. It was made on a budget of $114,000, which equates to about $838,000 in today's money. So,
righteous books.
that's more money than I've ever had to make a film with. But it's not a lot of money. It's peanuts for a film. You make a film for $1 million now, and that is astonishing.
I think they use it really well, though. Like, this is a film with, like, pyrotechnics and an explosion and a big cast of extras and makeup and all that kind of stuff. And I think they really they use the money that they have incredibly well. I think it's certainly shot in a kind of, I was reminded a bit of Pink Flamingos, John Waters in a couple of points, but not in a bad way necessarily. But you can tell that it's not a professional product in that sense. But in terms of the production values, what they put on the screen, I think they do very well.
Yeah, and another element, especially in those early bits where there's only the two characters and one of them's not talking, there's there's quite a lot where they just put a score over the top of it, and it feels like watching a silent film because, you know, the sound mix isn't like perfect, so you're losing a lot of the ambient, like the diegetic sound. So it just feels like it's music. They're running around, they're like chasing a zombie. But the score, it's like 60s TV score, but emulating 30s horror score. It's a really cool, interesting thing.
See, I really don't like the score. I wish it had more of a like a Halloween Before Halloween, or even Psycho, something that wasn't this kind of 1950s monster movie. Because everything that I'm seeing is better than that. I was going to ask Saul actually where the music came from, if it was just a public domain thing that Romero had to hand.
It's just library music they dug out. I think they might have paid for it, but it wasn't composed for the film. But it's very just like electronic kind of like it's very minimalistic noise, really, for the most part. It's not exactly music in the sense that we typically think of, I guess. It's quite John Carpenter in a lot of ways, but obviously less overtly electronic.
So can we just talk about the other characters a little bit? So they, Ben and Barbara have been in this house for quite a while. Ben is trying to knock some boards up against the window, trying to make it safe. So yeah, we're quite a significant way into the film when all of a sudden, from the basement, there's 5 new characters, or sort of 4 characters and a comatose young girl.
I think it's perfect pacing, though. It's that classic thing of, okay, we've got as far into this story as we can as is.
Something's got to
We need
happen.
an injection of something before all the zombies get in at the end or whatever. Let's just chuck these characters in and keep things moving. And I really like that they don't just turn up outside, like begging to come in, which is quite a common thing in films. I like that it's a bit more, they've kind of laid claim to this house already, and so the people we're following are encroaching on them rather than
But they've been there
decision
long
to
enough,
let
so
them-
it immediately
Yeah,
gives
yeah.
us this power play between the two alpha males. And it is, it is a very macho, bullshittery feel to the whole
by
thing.
design, though. Yeah.
Yeah. The interesting thing there is they go up against each other straight away, and it's pretty much throughout the whole thing. But what I found interesting, as much as we're on Ben's side and this Mr. Cooper is a bit of a knob, ultimately, though, Ben isn't right. Like, staying up there and boarding all those windows, there's about 42 points of entry for these zombies to get at them. And ultimately, what do? They go back down. They go down to the basement when all these zombies kick in.
Well, I have to no. I think Ben is right.
Well, I guess my point is it's not a simple cut and dry argument.
Yeah.
You can see why the guy wants to go down the basement. It does make sense, his side as
but
well.
I think, to be honest, I don't know why they don't go upstairs and like smash up the stairs. That seems like the sensible fallback. But I think it makes perfect sense from Ben's point of view that you leave the basement as a fallback.
That's your
last
panic
resort.
room,
Yeah, you don't just immediately retreat to your panic room. You have different lines of defense that you hold as long as you can. So I do think he has a point, but
I do quite
on
like
the other hand,
portrayal of Mr. Cooper, though, just to touch on sort of what Alan was just saying about he's not like, if this were a modern film, I'm sure they'd make him the most unlikable person. They'd make him a real antagonist.
and
have you
they made
seen
it
the
in
90s remake, Calvin?
No, I have not. So okay, interesting. Because here they have that scene with him and his wife and the daughter down in the cellar, and they're just chatting, and his wife saying something to the effect of "Oh, chill out" or something like that. And it's I don't get the sense that he's a very nice husband for her to be with, but I don't know. He felt more human than those kinds of characters normally do in these things.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it would be so easy to make him a complete caricature of what they're doing, and I think he's actually quite rounded for what he is. I think he works really well as a character.
But then also the wife there, she is the closest thing we get to a strong female. Yeah, she's kind of put upon by this arsehole husband, but she's not afraid to kind of go back at him, is she?
It's just that she spends most of the film by her daughter's side, so you don't really see her. She's down in the basement for most of the film. But yeah, when she talks, she's every bit as strong a character as anyone.
And I think that also comes into Mr. Cooper's character, the fact that we kind of it's a sort of they've already started arguing when we find out, he's got a little girl down there who's hurt. And that immediately kind of like, okay, well, we understand why he's panicking a little bit more and like why he's really wound up. Because the first thing that they get in about is like, what, you were in the basement the whole time? Didn't you hear us screaming and like trying to fight people? Like, why didn't you come and help? And but like also not unreasonable for him to go, hey, let's not go up there. It's obviously dangerous.
Yeah.
So I do see both sides, and I think that's good. I think that's really nicely done. But yeah, ultimately Ben is the kind of more heroic figure, and he's the good guy. And then the other two characters we have are Tom and Judy, who are just a young couple who are on the way up to Makeout Point or whatever, and they end up trapped here as well. And that's interesting. You've got the third male character there, but he's much more kind of like, oh, well, I'll just sort of do what I'm told, I suppose. But then you've got this other female character there you don't really do anything with, and then she just becomes a total tit and kind of just runs out of the door when really it's not a good idea. That's the sort of the weakest character is Judy, I think. And definitely could have done more with that or made it more interesting somehow.
But I get the sense that they are there for body count. I think there is and you could just do this with even Barbara, to be honest. I mean, she doesn't do a whole lot after the first half an hour. Maybe it could have just been Ben and the Coopers in this house, but I like that Barbara is here. I do like her and everything that you were saying about a very realistic sort of feeling portrayal of someone just completely catatonic state. And it does give you that great moment at the end when she sees that her brother has become one of the zombies as well, and that's sort of what is her undoing, really.
Repeated in Shaun of the Dead, isn't it? With what's her name? Lucy Davis going mad, running out after David gets eaten.
There is one more element that we need to address specifically, I think, and that is the use of news clips, radio / television bulletins.
My favourite part of the film, I would say. But they're really effective here, I think, because they offer you a window into the chaos happening in the rest of the world. We're only seeing a very specific sliver, like a real snapshot of this zombie apocalypse. And I think the news bulletins allow a view of, this from a wider societal perspective.
When first reports began filtering in, newsmen and law enforcement agencies were of the opinion
This place is boarded up pretty solid now.
in nature. However, as these
We ought to be all right here for a while.
dramatically, it was soon apparent that
We have
this
the
was
gun
something
and
more than the
bullets,
usual run of lawlessness.
Food and the
Some
radio.
officials began to suspect an obscure kind of conspiracy.
Sooner or later, someone's
Things as
bound to come and get us out.
creatures from outer space. So again, we join with law enforcement agencies in urging you to seek shelter in a building. Lock the doors and windows securely.
Hey, that's us. We're doing all right.
Cautious of any suspicious strangers. And keep tuned to your radio and television for survival instructions and further details of this continuing story.
But it is real exposition stuff, but the way that it's woven in makes it feel okay. It feels natural. There's not a lot of information to give because it's not explaining what's happening.
And, well, that's the other thing. They never actually explain what caused the zombies to rise, which was a big bone of contention, I think, for me as a kid. I wasn't sure how I felt about... I don't know, I always kind of felt like it was a cop-out. But then at the same time, any reason they give is open to scrutiny, and there is no reason that could realistically bring the dead to life. So it's better to give nothing. And they do give, they heavily imply it's down to radiation from a downed satellite in one of the news reports. So they basically say to you, look, we could have said it was this. We're not going to say it's that because it's silly, but there's your reason if you need one. And I think that's the best possible way of handling it. It's really good, economical filmmaking.
I can talk about a scene that the only other scene that I really wanted to talk about, the scene where the little girl, the bit where she's kills her mother in the cellar is just the sound design. I don't quite know what they did to the mum screams during that sequence,
God,
but
yeah,
it's really because it's not. They don't have the kind of hammy music over it. It's just the screams and the trowel and stabbing. It's really fantastic. I love that scene.
It goes very shrill, and there's a sort of echo applied to it. It's quite. Of course, another example of a zombie using a tool in this film. The daughter kills with a trowel rather than just biting the mother. One of the more iconic moments in the film. She is the poster in a lot of places.
Oh yeah.
Shall we rate?
I guess so. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about it. So, I think it's an incredible film, incredibly influential. I would argue one of the most influential films in cinema history, to be honest. I'd struggle to think of a film that's had more clear-cut reach than this one. And I think beyond that, because, sometimes things like that don't necessarily age all that well, but I think this is still a terrific piece of entertainment. And I think it's a very effective horror film, I think it really works what it's trying to do. So I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. I think it's really incredible.
Well, I think it obviously it has aged, but when I watch this, and I think it helps that it's black and white and this kind of low budget thing. It feels like it was made a long time ago. It feels in a particular time. And so I'm happy to see it in that time. And so there's certain elements that you kind of go, okay, that was the 60s, it's all right. But what I love about low budget things are how easily I will accept these flaws, like slightly wonky acting and stuff like that, if it's done well, if it's like a story told well.
Yeah.
Anyway, basically, my point is that I don't feel like I'm having to make allowances for this. I feel like I am enjoying it on the actual level that it's supposed to be. I liked it a lot. I think it was a great piece of filmmaking. And as you say, the legacy and all that, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Wow.
Well, no, I'm going to continue on with the positives. I really do love some of the horror films this year, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of my favorite films, and I just love the kind of gritty quality they have to be made well, obviously. Like, obviously, there are so many films of the time, like I'm thinking of Last House on the Left, for example, which is of that same ilk and that same kind of low budget, a bunch of, people grabbing some camera gear and not real actors and all that kind of stuff and making a film where I think Night of the Living Dead and Texas Chainsaw Massacre succeed way beyond a lot of their peers, and you can point to maybe things that are not necessarily intended or happened accidentally or just a limitation of the equipment that they had, the budget they had, whatever, but the fact that they made what they made and it was so fantastic speaks volumes, I think, and I'm just really appreciative that we have films like that today and that it kind of survived, I guess, given all of the rights issues.
Just before you give your rating, I just want to pick up on what you said there. You just made me think of something. I don't think I watched this film as like, oh, this is a horror film, I really like the horror elements, because I don't like horror films particularly. What really made me enjoy this film is the character stuff, that kind of psychological interplay between them all. Put that into a horror context and I'm fine with that. Whereas as a straight horror, like, to be fair, I haven't seen it for a long time, but something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Last House on the Left, the kind of gritty horror nature of it doesn't get to me at all, doesn't do anything for me. It's this character-driven stuff that really works for me.
Can I just pick up on something you said as well, Calvin,
Yeah,
which
sure.
is the kind of gritty feel of films from this era. Obviously, it's partly down to it being done well, and I don't want to take away from that at all, but I think there is something to be said for low-quality film stock being infinitely superior to low-quality digital filmmaking.
Completely.
As we're going to get into in a bit, I watched the many, many remakes of this film, which are, of course, largely digital. And I can tell you that a bunch of people pulling together a film on $100,000 with digital filmmaking techniques, it just doesn't compare in terms of quality, in terms of atmosphere, in terms of tone, in terms of creating a visceral response to what you're watching. It just doesn't work. And it's not like the cinematography in this film is technically remarkable. It's just capturing that kind of artistic eye. I don't know. It's just, yeah.
No, I agree. There's just some shot. There's a shot that I really like where it's Barbara and she runs to the phone and it's kind of like a bit of a Dutch angle. And there's just this weird thing on the wall behind her. I think it's like an animal print or something. It's a really strange, but just how they've composed that shot just looks real. I do love that still. Anyway, it's a 9 out of 10 from me. The only drawbacks for me are, I think it's a shame about the music, and I would really love it if there was a more minimalist kind of score on here. And I think that some of the character stuff in the middle, particularly with the younger characters, the young couple, some of that is a bit grating. I like Ben, Barbara, and the Coopers, but yeah, just a few drawbacks. But it's a phenomenal bit of work. Love it.
Wow. That makes Night of the Living Dead our third highest rated film on the podcast of all time. Joint third place with Jurassic Park, I believe.
Wow.
That's quite remarkable. I didn't think it would get that high. Calvin, you just mentioned the music, and
yes.
I'm going to pick you up on something to do with that in just a second. But before we get to that, I'm going to take the opportunity to plug what you might know as Development Hell, the sort of side podcast that I started. It's not called Development Hell anymore.
Oh.
It's changed its name, everyone, to How Didn't This Get Made? The reason being, I pitched a show very similar, also called Development Hell, to iHeartRadio, which is now going to pilot for their next great podcast thing. So
that's exciting.
So look out for another thing called Development Hell from me in the future, because I might need you all to go vote for it. But
are you a fully fledged professional podcast producer now?
Yeah, I'm gonna get a budget from them to make it, and
Jesus,
hope they might. It'll be between that and 9 other podcasts. They'll be, commissioning one of them to make it an actual show. So, but I'm bringing it up because I'm not going to bore you guys with the hundreds of thousands of Night of the Living Dead offshoots that exist. Sequels, unofficial sequels, remakes and things. I'm going to be very concise and try and trim it down a bit because I have an episode of How Didn't This Get Made going out, all about the hundreds of thousands of potential sequels to these films, which George Romero and friends never managed to get off the ground. So that should be out by the time you listen to this. If not, it'll be like next week's episode. So go and check that out. Go subscribe to How Didn't This Get Made. Go to dimreturns.com. There's links to everything there. But Calvin was just talking about music for Night of the Living Dead.
I didn't like it.
So you might like, Calvin,
the
30th anniversary I don't know what you call it. It's just called Night of the Living Dead 30th Anniversary Edition, I think.
Is this the one where they filmed like an extended opening or something? They did new stuff to it, right?
Yeah, John A. Russo in 1999, attempting to make a bit of money off this film in the same way that George A. Romero and everyone had kind of capitalized on it with sequels. He thought, you know what? I'm going to make a straight up direct sequel to Night of the Living Dead myself, separate to George A. Romero's films, but in order to kind of get people primed and build up a bit of anticipation and what have you, he decided to re-edit Night of the Living Dead. So his version is basically Night of the Living Dead with about 15 minutes taken out of it, and about 15 minutes of new material put in their place. And, Calvin, an entirely new score composed specifically for the film.
Oh, okay. Is it good?
No, sadly, it's absolutely terrible. The score's fine. There's nothing wrong with the score. It's just very 90s horror generic. So you might prefer that. But the new sequences are... There's a prolonged bit at the start that explains where that first zombie came from, which none of us needed to see, I'm sure.
Nope.
And it's... The acting is abysmal. I don't know what... They're going to the funeral of this man who was executed. He was a murderer. And, all the police are there like, open up the coffin. I want to make sure he's dead so I can spit on him before he goes in the ground. And there's a preacher there who is appalling. And it is the guy who played the zombie. I think it's the same actor reprising the role of that zombie 30 years on. Which is funny because the zombie... like de-ages 30 years.
he seems more sprightly than the guy when he was alive.
Yeah. But basically you see, they're there about to give the funeral. Up jumps the zombie, another zombie turns up, attacks them, they run off. We cut to Barbara and Johnny being attacked by the zombie. Completely pointless. Detracts from the film because it's so badly shot and acted and put together. And cheap. Then there are extended sequences of zombie carnage. These aren't bad, actually. If that's something you care about, you get to see a one-armed zombie, 1950s diner waitress walking around. Yeah, they're fine. They blend in quite well. And then there's an ending on the film with that preacher coming back from the start. And basically, there's more news reporter stuff added in as well with a new news reporter woman character. And at the end, she's interviewing that preacher because he was bitten on the face and didn't turn into a zombie. And he claims it's because the zombies are a demonic entity and he's close to God, therefore he was spared and didn't allow the demons into his body. And for some reason, he's got a little handbag dog, a little tiny, fluffy, poodly thing on his lap when he's doing this, which is bizarre. And it's just a bizarre ending. It's are we meant to take that at face value? Are you trying to make some comment about religious fanaticism I don't get? It's just bizarre. So avoid the 30th anniversary version. But more than the 30th anniversary version, avoid the sequel it spawned, Children of the Living Dead, which is abysmal. So John A. Russo and George A. Romero both wrote Night of the Living Dead. They didn't continue working with each other on the sequels. I think they had an amicable split. I don't think there was any bad blood particularly, but they agreed that George Romero would get the Of the Dead name and John A. Russo would get arguably the better deal of the Living Dead, which was, more clearly tied to Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
And he's been trying to capitalize on it ever since. He wrote a book sequel back in the day called Children of the Living Dead. He kickstarted the Return of the Living Dead. In fact, I think Return of the Living Dead was a book he wrote as well. And then obviously that turned into the Return of the Living Dead movies, which we'll cover at some point on this podcast, I'm sure, but probably not for a while. And at some point he went back and made Children of the Living Dead, and it is abysmal. Tom Savini is in it, but it's hard to watch. It is, made for no money by people who aren't as talented as the people making Night of the Living Dead. It's just difficult to watch. I have nothing really to add to it. I mean, it's one of the few films I've ever given a 1 out of 10 to. And there's going to be some more of those today, guys. So anyway, that's a little tangent about the anniversary version, the offshoot. But before either of those, George A. Romero himself had a similar kind of idea about making a bit of money off the franchise. He and Tom Savini, the makeup guy, partnered up again to produce a remake of the film themselves, the 1990 Night of the Living Dead, which you've watched, Alan, yeah?
Yeah.
I'm sure you're not going to be as positive about it. I think it's an admirable effort to make a new version of this film. It's not something anyone was really asking for. I think it's very watchable, very entertaining on a kind of base level.
It's not a bad film. It is. I mean, when you're remaking a classic like that, it's a poison chalice, obviously. But I think there's the scope here because of the limitations that were on Night of the Living Dead to do it in a kind of slightly new, more modern context.
Yes. The remake was written by George Romero. He wrote the screenplay. Tom Savini made his directorial debut.
I looked at that. Yeah, the only film he's directed, really, proper film. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's not a bad job of it, really, for a first-time director. And also, notably, it stars Tony Todd, who we would have been covering in quite a bit of depth on this podcast had Candyman not been delayed into 2021. But yeah, Tony Todd, Candyman himself as Ben.
Pre-Candyman, though.
It is, although he does carry a hook thing around at one point, which is an odd little detail. Calvin, I think it's a shame you haven't seen this one, because my assumption is you would love this film and you might even like it more than the original.
Oh,
do you know what I mean, Alan?
I do, yeah.
It just kind of has it just kind of has that Calvin vibe about it where
oh, okay. You know what? I'm going to watch it and I will report back on the next installment of this series.
Calvin, I think you're going to love it, mainly because the biggest difference between this film and the original is the character of Barbara. It feels as though it's a very conscious decision on their part to not have a silly, cowering woman who is delirious and no use to anyone. And it's clearly inspired by the contemporary films that have been coming out the years before it. It's from 1990, so, you know, hot on the heels of Aliens and Terminator. Yeah. So Barbara basically is a full-on action badass in this film. It's ridiculous. She starts off as a kind of bookish librarian with a pair of glasses, but by the end she's gone full Rambo with a thing tied around her head and gun toting and yeah.
And the woman playing her, Patricia Tallman, I looked her up, was at the time certainly more of a stunt performer than an actor. Yeah,
right.
A whole litany of stunts prior to this, but has done plenty of acting as well.
I think she does a great job of... It's quite a hard transition to sell, because she starts off the film like the other Barbara, just terrified, but she does go to this hardened Sarah Connor figure by the end of it. And that's a very difficult transition to sell. I think she does a remarkable job of helping to sell that.
I think it paces out quite well as well. She sort of she goes into that shock mode and then she kind of snaps out of it and goes, okay, well, if this is what we're doing, this is what I've got to do. And she does change. You see the change as you go along. One other big notable miss, as far as I'm concerned, is they don't really have the news footage stuff. There's a couple of little moments, but you don't really get radio and TV stuff. I think that's... I could see why you might chop that down, but it just seems to get lost altogether.
I think that there are one or two sequences, but it's not nearly as much. I think maybe they just felt like after making Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, they'd, moved on to a new approach with it, maybe. I don't know. Dawn of the Dead is, of course, set in a newsroom at the start, so it's got a lot of that in there up front.
So we were talking earlier about the Mr. Cooper, Harry Cooper character, how in that first film, it could be a lot more of a kind of caricature arsehole. Well, that's pretty much what they do in this one.
You will see with these films, George Romero's writing style. He's not afraid of two-dimensional like thinly drawn characters who have like one overbearing personality trait, which is all they have about them, and that's it. And to give him credit, I think it largely works to make very effectively economically entertaining films for the most part. But it's not as good as writing a really good, really, fully fleshed out three-dimensional character. Now, Night of the Living Dead, the original, kind of worked in spite of this. It came down on the right line, I think, the right side of silly and two-dimensional. This film, it is just full-on. Cooper is just... like, it's just unrealistic, isn't it? How unlikable he is. It's just no one would be that much of a dickhead.
There are some significant differences to the ending.
Well, I think the ending is born out of that, and maybe they really felt they had to dial him up as a dickhead to get the ending to work to the extent
it didn't
that
work
it does.
for me.
Yeah, it didn't work for me. So the big change. Should we? Do we want to spoil this for Calvin, or should we?
Let's save it for next week. We'll come back to it and touch on this before we start next week.
So they changed the ending, but that's a pin in it. All right, so come back for discussion of Night of the Living Dead 1990 remake part 2 next week, prefacing our Dawn of the Dead discussion. But for the time being, I think it's a solid, entertaining film. I give it a 7 out of 10.
Oh.
Yeah, it's fine. There's some interesting elements in terms of like, how they've changed it, how they've chosen to change things. Ultimately, doesn't have the same atmosphere. I didn't like how the ending came out. 6 out of 10.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, more on that next week. Oh, hello. Who is it?
Don't open, it's zombies.
Do you want to get the door, Alan?
Well, no, I've already boarded it up. I've nailed the door over the door.
Oh, Christ. Right, hang on. Let me just get the hammer.
Shout through the window.
All right, let's open the window.
It's just a little
trick or treat.
Sorry, what?
Trick or treat.
Trick or treat. Oh god, it's Zombie Bond.
What you saying zombie for you?
Oh, he's got an window.
Bastard.
Oh no, it's just Sean Connery. He looks dead.
Of course. Yeah. What's the closest Sean Connery's been to a zombie movie? League of Extraordinary Gentlemen? Was there
I suppose.
someone in that who...
Yeah, probably.
Oh, Highlander, surely.
Highlander, yes, of
They're
course.
kind of immortal sort of thing.
You've never seen Highlander?
No. Is that the one where he's like
One of my
a
best
Spanish
films,
prince or something?
Yeah. I'm a Spanish. I've come to teach you Spanish.
What are you here for, Japanese Bond? Anyone who's new to this show, Japanese
Just
Bond
go with
it. just go with it. You have to go back to like episode 68 or something when we covered the James Bond movie where James Bond dressed up as a Japanese fisherman to go undercover. It's a long running thing, but basically he pops in from time to time to give us Patreon updates. I think that's his only purpose now. Is that why you're here now? Aye, we've got a couple of names off the Patreon, lads.
Oh, we've got new patrons on our Patreon. So our Patreon, which is patreon.com/dimreturns, $1 a month. $1. Can you imagine? Such a bargain. And for that, you get all sorts of extra content, which is mostly us talking, reviewing new releases that are tied into the episodes we've talked about previously. Obviously, that's not a lot going on at the moment. So we've started doing all sorts of other things. For example, we've recently started doing a quiz called Whose List Is It Anyway? Which is where Sol finds the top 10 film lists of like famous people, like people's favourite films. And then we have to figure out who he's talking about. What else do we do, Sol?
Well, yeah, we do all sorts of little things like that. We've just covered Bill and Ted. We put the odd bonus full-length episode up there. We did one covering Tenet recently. Yeah. There's new... What's the word? We put stuff up ahead of release. Anything that's finished early goes up on there when we can. So The Purge, for example, we've recorded that because there was going to be a new Purge movie out this year. It got delayed into 2021, so we put it up early on our Patreon.
And votes.
We have polls as well. Yeah, listener polls. The last year, we let everyone vote for their choice of Halloween film. We haven't done that this year, obviously, but currently you can go and vote for which Pixar movie we're going to cover in an upcoming episode, and it is actually neck and neck at the time of recording.
Oh, between which?
Monsters, Inc. and Wall-E, Calvin. They're both tied. We're also running a poll for classic films. We've got a list up there of the top 10 AFI greatest films that we haven't already covered on the show.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go and vote for which one of those you want. There's films like, I think it's 12 Angry Men on there, Casablanca, Citizen Kane. It's all stuff like that, you know? Real classics. So, yeah. We do a lot on our Patreon. It's good fun.
Yes.
Aye, lads. Well, these lads think so. We got a. I think you know these lads, to be honest, guys. It's not that impressive. You got a Michael Godfrey on here.
Oh, right, yeah. Oh, old school.
Yeah.
Aye.
Someone
Thanks,
we went to
Mike.
university with. Thank you very much.
Aye.
He does comment on our stuff every now and then on Facebook and stuff, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Much
There you
appreciated. Hope you're enjoying the old Diminisodes on there. Aye, and someone else who's hopefully enjoying that shite, Matt Dykes.
Oh, another blast from the past. Someone else we went to uni with.
Yes, and it's a hat trick of those guys. Joe Johnston.
Oh, right, yeah.
I can't say this guy's name. Joe Johnston.
The director of Jumanji.
That's the one. Director of the Rocketeer, starring my pal Timothy. No, what is he? Starring Welsh Bond.
You've never met him. You've never met.
Oh,
Timothy
shit. I've met Welsh Bond.
Where do all the Bonds live? On an island somewhere.
James Bond Island.
I mean, there is actually an island called James Bond Island. It's in Thailand. It's where Scaramanga lived with Nick.
Is that like how they named that airport in the Caribbean, the Ian Fleming Airport, just to get a bit of tourism?
Yeah.
All right. Well. Thanks, Japanese Bond, for stopping by. Oh no problem, lads. But I did say trick or treat, so where's my sweets?
Give him a penny.
Oh, thanks. All right, see you, lads.
Oh, goodbye. It was nice to see you again. Good luck out there.
What sweets do you think Sean Connery likes? I bet it's like something really crap.
Fisherman's Friend.
Licorice.
Aniseed. Yeah, Fisherman's Fringe.
Barley sugars.
Aniseed. No, I like shortbread, you fuckers. Give me a nice slice of shortbread. That's all I need. All right, see you, lads.
Go on.
See ya.
Get
Good luck. Hope you've got your provisions and some weapon.
I'll see him off with an open hand in his zombies out there. It'll be fine.
Oh dear. Nail that door shut.
Yeah.
Thank you to our new supporters there. Thank you for making
thanks, guys.
Deal with Japanese Bond. So the other film we watched in terms of dealing with for this show was Diary of the Dead. Because that is, in the Romero canon, that is set at the same time as Night of the Living Dead. Like, that's the idea. We'll get to that in a minute.
So Calvin, as a James Bond aficionado, will be familiar with the idea of a sliding time frame. But it really confuses some people.
Yes.
So Dawn of the Dead was made 10 years after Night of the Living Dead. Now, a lot of people can't seem to wrap their head around the idea that the film is set 3 weeks after Night of the Living Dead and not 10 years after it. Because they have updated all the fashion and the technology and stuff. And the same is true of all of George Romero's films. Day of the Dead is set, I think, 3 months or so after everything's kicked off. Land of the Dead is specifically set as being 3 years after Night of the Living Dead. And yeah, Land of the Dead was the end of everything, really. And Romero kind of realised, I don't think I can go any further with this. So for his next film, Diary of the Dead, in 2007, he went back to the initial outbreak and made a film set concurrently with Night of the Living Dead, but
set in 2007.
Also set in 2007, yeah.
But before we get into that film, Sol, give us some zombie film history in terms of, like, what else did Night of the Living Dead spawn?
I think the first example out there, certainly the first notable one, is a film called Night of the Living Dead 3D, which was released in 2006, riding the wave of zombie renaissance with films like 28 Days Later, Resident Evil, Shaun of the Dead, and the Dawn of the Dead remake before it. Yeah, someone put together a remake of Night of the Living Dead in 3D. And I never bothered to watch this film until we decided to do this podcast, because I just thought, I don't need to watch some shit, crap remake from who gives a fuck. But I finally, I thought, well, I'll put the effort in for this podcast. And I have to say, I was very pleasantly surprised. It wasn't nearly as awful as it might have been. It wasn't good, but
high praise.
I was expecting something difficult to watch. This film is quite easy to sit through. In fact, dare I say, the first 15 minutes are legitimately quite entertaining, even quite effective horror in a couple of places. The first 15 minutes, of course, being Barbara and Johnny going to the cemetery and being attacked by zombies. But they're in the cemetery, and I suppose the main difference with this film is that it all kind of surrounds a morgue. It's very weird. Basically, there's a character who is the mortician, Gerald Tovar Jr., played by a guy called Sid Haig, who's poised as a bit of an old man badass with a shovel. You know Sid Haig, yeah?
Yeah, of course.
He's in a James Bond film, isn't he? Is that right?
Well, he is. Yes, but he's more known for being in Rob Zombie films. House of a Thousand Corpses is the big one.
He's a bit of a horror icon, isn't
he? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just for Soul to be like some guy.
Well, he's okay in this, but he's not remarkable. But he's obviously their big get,
Yeah.
And he's playing, like I say, a kind of old man badass archetype, going around with a shovel, that Barbara runs in to the morgue and he asks her to leave, and she's like, but the dead are coming to life, and he's, offing zombies left and right, like, I'm afraid, ma'am, you'll have to leave. But basically it turns out it's some weird thing where he's perfected, I don't know, there's like toxic waste or something. Basically, the dead are coming back to life and he's gone mad, and his dad's there and he's keeping his dad as a zombie and trying to feed him and trap people, and there's an outbreak that he can't control, and it's not handled that well. But yeah, you're immediately dropped into a kind of people in a farmhouse situation. And then at the end it becomes a kind of him v them as he's trying to feed them to zombies, so it goes a bit different again, but it's largely the same basic thing. As I say, it's far, far better than I was expecting, but that doesn't mean it's good. I gave it a 4 out of 10 for what that's worth. And this guy who put this film together is a guy called Jeff Broadstreet, who directed it. He followed the film up in 2012 with a sequel, Night of the Living Dead 3D Reanimation, one of the most confusingly named films in the world. Particularly as there's another remake called Night of the Living Dead Reanimation, which is that thing where a load of people source animated 5 seconds of animation from people on the internet and stick it. They get the original audio and like animate the whole film.
Oh, that sounds quite cool, actually.
Yeah, they did that in 2009, Night of the Living Dead Reanimation. But this is Night of the Living Dead 3D Reanimation from 2012, which is a prequel to that film about Gerald Tovar explaining what he was doing in the morgue before. Inexplicably, it's now a full-on horror comedy, with like a zombie baby in a mini fridge and stuff like that. And they've replaced Sid Haig with a guy called Andrew Divoff, who I don't know, but he's very good. He seems to be in that low-budget horror territory. But most notably, they add in his brother, played by Jeffrey Combs.
Oh,
Harold Tovar.
Great actor.
Now, as much as I love Jeffrey Combs, it sadly is not enough to salvage this piece of shit film, which I don't know what they thought they were doing. And there's a sequence where all the morticians are like getting high because one of them's this kind of rock chick character. They're getting high in the morgue with a dead body on the slab, and then like they're so high they don't notice that the zombie gets up, and like they're doing this thing of like passing the joint like back and forth down the three of them up against the wall, and they pass it to the guy on the end, and he turns around and passes it to the zombie who's now like sat next to him, and you kind of think, oh, they're doing a joke, like they're going to realise it's a zombie, like Scooby-Doo style, and go, ah! But no, what actually happens is the zombie just starts smoking the joint with them. and they're too high to realise that shouldn't be happening. So it's a terrible, terrible film. No real plot. It's just the odd zombie turns up in the morgue. Harold Tovar whacks him with a shovel. Really shit. I gave it 2 out of 10. Don't bother with it. Then in 2012 as well, we got a film that friend of the show, Scott Chambers, worked on. Alan and I were actually chatting to him about this just the other night. Night of the Living Dead Resurrection, a Welsh remake. I don't mean Welsh language, it's in English, but everyone has got a very heavy Welsh accent. It was directed by a guy called James Plum and shot in Wales. And this, I mean, if you think Night of the Living Dead is low budget, watch this. It's so bad. It's so bad. This whole thing, I mean, our friend of the show was saying about how they were shooting it on like little DV cameras, and it's not a good looking film. The makeup isn't terrible, but it feels like if you and I just made a film on our phones. Like, that's pretty much what this is, except there's more actors in it, but they're not good. To give you a sense of what we're dealing with, when that man goes into the newsagents, they've obviously tried to kit it out, much like Shaun of the Dead, with all these details in the background, like newspaper headlines. Right. But the way they've done that is there's a big A4 piece of paper, not a special font or anything, and it just says "The Dead Rise?" on a piece of paper. So it's not like the front page of a newspaper. It's not like they've written out the Times or the Wales Times and put The Dead Rise on it. It just has the words "The Dead Rise" on a piece of paper, an A4 piece of paper.
Should we do it? Should we do a version of Night of the Living Dead?
I think we should. I think we should. I think, yeah. Should we do Night of the Living Dead with Japanese Bond? Definitely not racist Liam Neeson and Calvin all have to hole up in a house together. Yeah, but I think anyway, this film is terrible. It's abysmal, and I think this sums it up best of all. The ending of the film. 2 characters make it through to the end. A young girl, and not massively young, but teenage girl, and her mum. And these kind of gun-toting redneck characters turn up, even though it's in the middle of Wales. They've got Welsh accents and like camo gear on, so you can buy, right, these are guys who would have access to guns. They're driving around in a van, and they throw them down on the ground and say, like, "Are they clean?" Oh, that's the worst accent I've kind of...
It was good.
Are they clean? That one's clean. I can't do Welsh.
Oh no, it's getting worse.
They go, are they... They go, are they clean? She's been bitten. And then just immediately shoot the mum. And the woman left's like... and then the guy goes, "She's clean. Very clean." And then, this is the final line of the film, and I had to rewind a few seconds to make sure I hadn't, like, misheard it. And I think this sums up the film. The final line of the film is, "Stick her in the rape van. Let's get out of here."
Christ.
Oh my god.
So that's the end of your film. It's just a close-up of her going, "Duh!" as they say, "Stick her in the rape van." I don't know what point they're trying to make. It's not, like, artistically justified. They obviously thought that was a cool twist for the end of their film. So it's terrible. 1 out of 10. Absolutely awful. One of the worst films I've ever seen in my entire life. Then there's another remake from 2014, just called Night of the Living Dead. I couldn't find any way of watching this film. I don't think it's ever been officially released to the public in any capacity, even if you were willing to spend money on it. But you should, in fact, guys, right now, get on YouTube, type in Night of the Living Dead 2014. I want you to watch the trailer and see what I mean.
Oh, okay.
This film screened in a film festival, so it does exist. It is out there, but I don't think it's ever been made commercially available, and I don't think you could get people to pay money for this.
What was it, 2014?
Yeah, 2014, from a company called Shattered Image Films. This should explain what I've been dealing with, because this is the level of these films, but this looks possibly like the worst one, so, right.
Right,
Check it
let's
out.
go, Alan, on 3.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Oh dear, that was a bad logo. Shattered Images Films.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got...
Oh, okay.
So we've got a girl who appears to be 20 or something, but it looks like she's playing a 7-year-old
Yeah,
or an
she's got
8-year-old. She's
pigtails,
picking
yeah.
flowers with her hair.
She looks like she just
Should
wandered
be
out of a high school
Badly
production of The
framed.
Wizard of
It's
Oz.
zooming in. That's a digital zoom.
And now we're into slow motion.
Oh,
I
God.
think this is the worst slow motion I've ever seen in
Wow.
a film. It's obviously not
Oh.
shot in slow motion. Oh, and then it goes black and white.
Oh.
So the slow motion is like this blur effect. It's awful. It's horrible.
Are they doing a
It's like
kind
you're
of
having a
inverted Wizard of Oz
seizure.
thing with this? I'm getting, yeah,
I don't know.
from colour to black and white in this case.
And the shot of the zombies in black and white don't look that bad, but then we just have random shots of other people just like chatting, and it just looks like YouTubers
Just completely
like doing
framed
a
completely arbitrarily. Some of these shots, doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to the frame.
yeah, and then some more shots of
Very
zombies.
stark lighting. There's no lighting involved.
Oof, wow. Chad Zuva?
You sure that was made? That
Yeah.
feels like someone's made a trailer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know what you mean. IMDb says that it had screened at not a film festival actually. It just says it screened at a premiere in Ohio, which to me sounds like they did finish the film and managed to screen it one night only for everyone involved to go and watch it. So that's that one. And last of all, but not quite least, there is Night of the Living Dead Darkest Dawn.
Darkest Dawn.
Yes. Which is a 2015 animated remake of Night of the Living Dead. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, cool.
But someone just put the film in After Effects and put on the animation.
No,
filter.
it's a newly recorded audio featuring Tony Todd, who they've got into to play Ben again, horror icon. So they're working with a bit of money, not much, but not an insignificant amount. I mean, we've spoken about bad CGI in this show before and compared it to PS2 graphics. But, like, I am not exaggerating. This looks like a PS2 game and not one that has been, had care and time put into it. The animation is abysmal.
What's it called again? Is any of it on YouTube?
Yeah,
Darkest
again,
Dawn?
just look up the trailer. Night of the Living Dead, Darkest Dawn.
Brilliant.
You'll see what I mean. Now, when I watch this film, and I'm not exaggerating, am I? There's no hyperbole. It looks like a PS2 game.
It looks dreadful. It looks like The Sims or...
Yeah. And it doesn't work to its strengths because the texture on the CG models is so low. It kind of gets away with it in like long shots in the streets of a city where you don't see the characters up close. But they have like severe close-ups on their face and stuff. And you can see the lack of like proper lip sync and the lack of texture and the corners on their head. And it's just abysmal. I mean, the trailers, looking at it now, some of the best shots in the film. It's worse than that. Yeah, it's abysmal animation. To the point that when I watched it, I assumed it was one guy had animated this film in their bedroom as like a passion project. But no, this was a proper production. There's 3 directors on this film.
Goodness.
It had money behind it. It's like a proper film from a production company.
Some kind of
It's
money
just
laundering
unbelievable.
exercise.
I did just see at the end of that it said a Simon West production. Is that the Simon West who made Con Air and Lara Croft Tomb Raider? I'm guessing it's not.
Very possibly.
surely.
I mean, I hope not. I shall look it up.
Oh no,
Simon
it is on
West.
IMDb. It's on his IMDb.
He's the producer. Yeah, I guess it is. Well, there you go. It had money, and I just don't know what. I don't know how this film happened.
I've just skipped to like the end credits because I was like, I want to see how many people worked on this. It does have like a proper end
Yeah.
credits. In the special thanks, they thank Google and Microsoft. Like, what did they for using the engine? Maybe like
Probably, yeah. They probably used Google a couple of times. The acting in this film is appalling. It's like the actors didn't know they were being recorded. Like, honestly, it's they mumble. You can't hear what they're saying half the time. It sounds like they did one take of every line. The sound mix is awful, and there's this bizarre thing where there's just like random flashes of red and yellow in the film, like every few minutes, that are obviously some kind of weird stylistic choice to be scary or something, but it looks like it's cut together from like cutscenes in a video game, and they've just had to like splice them together. It's the weirdest production.
oh wow, yeah, they've got some. I'm just looking at the cast now. They've got Tony Todd, Danielle Harris, who was in a few of the Halloween films, Bill Moseley from Texas Chainsaw
Yeah, Bill
Massacre.
Moseley.
Yeah, it's not a bad sort of assembly of people from the genre.
Yeah. So I still gave it a 1 out of 10, and it is still one of the worst films I've ever seen, but it's better than the Welsh version. But a baffling affair. I don't know what this film is. Anyway, I think that's it conclusively for Night of the Living Dead remakes for now.
Wow.
But George A. Romero, of course, did his own line of cash-ins, and, you know, artistically justified. He made Dawn of the Dead, which we're going to be talking about next week. He made Day of the Dead, which we're going to be talking about the following week, and Land of the Dead. And then he decided to, as I said before, go back to the start, make a film set contemporaneously with Night of the Living Dead. Diary of the Dead from 2007, at the start of the zombie outbreak. This film is significant within this franchise for being shot found footage style. It largely predated the boom in found footage movies, because I think Cloverfield in 2008 was Cloverfield, really triggered a new wave of found footage movies. This is 2007, the year before that. It seemed to somehow anticipate that was something that we were going to have a lot of. I love that this film has got so many ideas and things to say. I don't think it really comes together. You know, it's put together as a kind of critique of the internet, and it's arguably incredibly ahead of its time. It really, I think, did predict a lot of issues with the internet that back in 2007, I remember, myself included, people were kind of laughing at George A. Romero, like, come on, old man. You know, it was that kind of like old man yells at cloud. Like, you don't get the internet, you don't get why it's good. 10 years on, oh no, he was absolutely right. The idea that anyone can put anything on the internet is very problematic. And that is what this film's about, but it doesn't necessarily do the best job of exploring it. It's a messy
I wondered
film.
what that ending tag was about, where they just show some rednecks like shooting zombies, and she's like, "Oh, it's terrible." Oh, okay, so it's the internet is horrible thing.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I read interviews with George Romero at the time, which were him saying, you know, anyone can start a blog and just write whatever they want on it, and that's scary. And he's absolutely right. That is the problem of our time, really, isn't it?
Do you know what, though? That's not the problem. The problem is anyone can write that or put something on the internet. The problem is that other people will see it and then believe it or just take it as read.
Well, this is the issue, that this film doesn't get into that. This film doesn't get into the idea of misinformation. It flirts with it. But then you need to have a character say, I've seen on the internet that the bytes don't hurt you. Or I've seen on the internet that you need to rub olive oil on the dead and they come back to life. Or I've seen on the internet that this place is a safe haven. Let's go there. Oh, it's full of zombies. That's what it needed to do. And it doesn't really engage with it in that way. It's just this weird kind of superficial fear of the internet.
But I don't know what the film was trying to say. It's the setup is it's a student film group. They're making a crappy horror film in the woods when the news
a mummy
and
movie.
the news comes out. But the whole thing is shot like on this guy's camera. But then for whatever reason he keeps his camera running even when they're not shooting.
Well, it's a weird film in that it rejects a lot of the found footage tropes out there, but then it kind of goes out of its way to have like more realism in other ways. This film acknowledges the battery life on the camera in a way that a lot of found footage films don't. The characters have to like charge up the camera, but then they edit the film together and have a musical score over it, and the character at the start says, I've put music over the film because I wanted it to be like a real film, to scare you. Ooh. And I like that they've gone for a cinematic approach with music rather than, realism. But
I don't see the point of doing the handheld thing if you're going to do that, though. Is
exactly. And I don't like you telling me that you've done it to then justify it. Just put music on it. Whatever. Like, who gives a shit?
Yeah, we accept that someone's found the footage and edited it together. Like we know, we understand that and the concept.
I don't know. The problem with this film is there's just an air of pretentiousness about it, and I think that's partly down to the protagonist and the performance.
Who would you say is the protagonist?
What's her name?
Oh,
the woman one.
Oh, I would have pointed Jason as the protagonist.
The cameraman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess he arguably is. I just think because she's the narrator that it's kind of framed from her perspective in a lot of ways, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it is very much an ensemble piece. It's following this group of students. There's a Texan one. Her entire personality is based around the fact that everyone on set seemed to think she could do a Texan accent, even though she can't. She is, of course, Canadian, like everyone else in this cast.
Don't mess with Texas.
The one exception to everyone being Canadian in this film is Scott Wentworth, who is an American actor doing a British accent. It's not a bad British accent, but it's also obviously not how that person speaks. It's obviously fake, and it hinders the guy's performance.
Andrew Maxwell, emeritus. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. And I'm not with anybody.
Yeah, look, if we spoke in Night of the Living Dead 1990 about the two-dimensional nature of some characters in George Romero's writing, I think this is the most perfect example of it, because he's had an idea for a fun character, he's given him, like, 2 personality traits, and that's it. Go on, Alan, what are those traits?
Well, this is what the information we find out about him, about his backstory. He's obviously English, got an English accent. He went to Eton, where, amongst other things, I'm sure he did archery. He served in some sort of war. It's not specified which war, but he's definitely got
probably the Falklands, isn't it?
Yeah, and then at some point he must have moved to America and became a film tutor
and an alcoholic.
Yeah. So that's the backstory of him. That sounds like a fascinating character. Unfortunately, it's expressed just mostly with the alcoholism and shooting people with arrows.
And he loves Charles Dickens as well. He comes on that Tale of Two Cities that he pulls out of the bookshelf towards the end.
Just
He's
to
like,
show how British
Tale
he
of
is.
Two Cities. Oh my goodness. He's getting very excited about it.
What you've described is a standard issue Quentin Tarantino protagonist. And I think it's interesting because it's just not quite done well enough, is it?
I think all the cast are terrible.
Yeah.
I think every single cast
I
member
agree.
in this is terrible. And I know that I read something about that they looked for a lot of stage actors because obviously they were filming this, long takes and all that kind of stuff.
As they did with Night of the Living Dead, they were largely Dwayne Jones was a stage actor. They gave his first film role to, and
But here it's they feel like they are playing to the back of the audience. Like some of them in particular, like some of the line deliveries are just really poor.
Yeah.
I thought the quality of acting was really bad.
The writing doesn't help because I love George Romero. I think he's quite a good writer in a lot of ways, but
I've not seen a lot of evidence of that.
I think he's a very economical writer, and he bashes scripts out. He always did. This film was turned around very quickly. But I think he needs to be paired with people who know how to work with it, And this film it's all the worst traits of his talents on show. The bit that I cringe at every time is at the end of the film, they kind of bookend it with... So at the start of the film, we open on seeing a mummy movie being shot with a guy dressed up as a mummy attacking a woman out in the woods. At the end of the film, that same guy has turned into a zombie and is chasing and attacking that same actor who was running away from him. And that's a nice bit of symmetry in the film. It's quite a nice way to make a film. But then the character literally turns to camera and says, "This is just like your stupid mummy movie." And it's delivered so badly. And it's such a lack of respect for the audience to think that we could piece that together ourselves. It just ruins it.
Yeah, there's no relation for these characters to reality or how people would act in a situation.
Completely agree.
For example, there's one bit quite early on where there's the woman driving the RV that they're all in. Some zombies come at the thing and she runs them over. Now, she doesn't even hesitate to run them over. She's just straight over them. But then, the fact that she would kind of do that in the moment and then she feels really guilty about it and she's feeling really torn up about it, that's a really nice character thing that we could explore.
Yeah, I think it's actually handled really nicely, that bit.
Yeah, instead what happens is she wanders off into the distance, the other characters we took her talking, and then she shoots herself in the head.
Yeah.
And that's as much as we get from that. It's that takes something. It takes quite a lot to kill yourself, actually. And in those circumstances, you can totally believe how she would feel really torn up about it. So if you're going to do that as a character thing, you need to do it properly. But then another good element is that she doesn't die. They then have to drag her to a hospital. They're trying to deal with her, and that's the problem. I quite like that as a concept, but again, it's just...
Yeah, but then you go to a hospital in a zombie movie. It should be carnage. It should be full to the brim of zombies. Instead, it's like everyone got word that zombies were on the way and vacated, and there's 2 zombies in this abandoned building. There's a weird sense of humour in this film as well that comes into play, which feels kind of odd. I mean, it does exist in the other films, but it's got the kind of slasher movie fun kill thing about itself. But the problem is, that's the only point really at which this film's sense of humour comes out, is when they pick up a defibrillator and then melt a zombie's eyeballs out of his head using the thing amped up. And it's just that's tonally out of whack with the rest of this film.
There's a bit I was trying to figure out if they were going for comedy with an Amish guy.
Now, now the Amish guy is a fan favourite. And I must say, I think it is a highlight of the film. I think the film is very enjoyable when he comes along and takes part.
It's a shame he's not in it for longer, honestly.
Well, George Romero is great at coming up with these fun little set pieces and characters. And this film could have been more of that, because another thing I love in this film, which I'll talk about in a minute, is all of the kind of found videos off the internet that the characters supposedly downloaded and cut in amongst the story. But I'll talk about that in a minute. There's an Amish guy they encounter. He's deaf and mute. Is he deaf? Yeah, he's deaf, isn't he?
Yeah, he's got that little blackboard around his neck that he sort of has to use chalk to write on.
Yeah, and he's been going around blowing up the zombies with sticks of dynamite. And he's great fun when he comes into play and joins them, but he's only in it for about 5-10 minutes, and then he offs himself.
But it feels like you've just changed the channel and you're watching a different film.
Yeah, there is that bit where he blows up the zombies and then he gets sort of showered with the earth or something. And what does he do? Does he sort of...
He's holding up he holds up a sign that says something like, "Hi, my name's Tim" or something, and it's like a Wile E. Coyote moment where he's holding up a sign while all the body parts fall around him. It's it's like a different film. I think in another silly, fun horror comedy, it would be great, but it's just not what this film is, or has been up until this point, or is after he leaves.
A lot of the deaths fall into that category as well, including his, where he is attacked from behind, so he smashes a scythe through his own head so that it goes through the skull of the zombie as well. Because, skulls are made of cheese or something. Just scythe just...
Look, Alan, right. You have a problem with that. I mean, it's not massively realistic, but you should try watching The Walking Dead sometime, because the characters just, poke a knife through zombies' foreheads through a fence. It's like their heads are made out of fucking butter. It's ridiculous. It really winds me up, actually. At least in this film, they're making a show of him putting some force into it. But like I say, I do love all the found footage videos that are cut in. The idea is that the internet's up and running, and I love seeing the little shots of a guy who's hanged himself off a bridge, but he's turned into a zombie, and the redneck shooting the zombies, and the news reports, and all that kind of stuff. And there's a sequence with a clown that I think is one of the best scenes in a horror movie of the noughties. It's just... That scene is so perfectly put together as a dark, scary bit of humour, where there's a kid crying at a birthday party, and the clown comes in, and the kid's scared of the clown, as we all are, and the parent goes to take the nose off the clown to go, look, it's just a normal person, don't be scared. And they accidentally take the zombie's nose off, and there's blood, and then the zombie attacks him. I think that sequence is amazing, but it's it's silly. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think I was just happy with silly. The amazing didn't come into it.
No, I think it's scary zombie clown terrifying a child. It's I think it's great.
I think I'd be fine with that. These sort of gory kills and these moments of humour and whatnot don't quite sit well with me because of the whole found footage thing, I think. Because if you make something in found footage, that tells me that you're going for some kind of realism or something. And I guess you
and the
can
nose
try
coming
to
off doesn't make any sense unless the zombie's been decaying for a while. Yeah, no, I know. It's silly.
Well, I mean, yeah. No. Well, I less so the logistics of the body stuff, more just the found footage. To me, Pinnacle is Blair Witch Project, which I think is an amazing film and just found footage done perfectly.
Yes.
And
check out our Blair Witch Project episode featuring an interview with the director Ed Sanchez.
Yeah.
And I don't think that I can't think of anything that's come afterwards that has managed that at all. And it is down to even the quality of the camera. This is obviously being shot on a quite, high-end digital camera that would not be available to film students, I don't think. And every now and then we get shots from other cameras where it's obviously just been downgraded digitally and whatnot. So I don't buy into that aspect of it. So I'm kind of well, what's the point of doing it then?
I also think we don't really play into the POV element of it.
Yeah.
There's a few moments where he's gets shocked by something, but we're seeing what they're seeing, so we should be right in there with them. But
I agree. I love found footage horror as a concept. I think it has the potential to be phenomenal, but so few films have done it well, and sadly, it's usually just used as a technique to allow low budget films to get made on a lower budget. Something of a crutch or an excuse for films being a bit crap. Zombie found footage has, of course, been done very well with Wreck. Wreck, in fact, came out the same year as this film.
Oof. Oh, that's embarrassing for Romero. Just on that point, sorry, I just because I was thinking about this when I was watching the film, and if you didn't tell me that this was Romero, I wouldn't know, and I don't know if that's a backhanded compliment to sort of say that this feels like it's being made by someone very young and just starting out and learning the ropes kind of thing.
I do, I get what you're saying. I do say I have a great deal of admiration for this film because you're talking about a man who was, in his 60s, I think, late 60s when he made this, who is still being innovative and trying new things and pushing the boundaries of what he's doing. And so I do have a great deal of respect for what he was trying to do. And, you know, I feel like I've been incredibly downbeat about it, which is probably more echoing you guys. I can sit through this film very happily. You know, I can watch it, but I'll say right now, I think this is a real blemish on the franchise, but that's not to say I hate it outright.
I mean, you can't just brush over the fact that the film's crap, though, because it's it's just the characters just don't make any sense. It's badly made. It's, you know, the acting isn't good, and you know, there's a bit where basically the whole thing is the characters go to a place, find zombies there, kill them all, and clear the place, and then go, "Oh, we should get out of here. Let's go to another place," and then they go to another place and kill zombies there. And it's just that 8 times. And then at one point they get sort of caught by a bunch of black people. For some reason, all the white people have gone, but black people have left in this town. It felt like that was going to go somewhere. It didn't. Like quite over and above the race stuff, which I don't think was really meant anything. It was like it felt like those characters were going to come back at the end or something, like or something would happen. Anything might happen. Yeah, and nothing happened.
I mean, I think the film is intentionally constructed as a series of tangents. It's very episodic by design, and yeah, I think that potential that has potential to be great, but no, I agree. It's not particularly done well, but I find it, like I say, I find it very watchable and easy to sit through. I'm not brushing over how, you know, it has weaknesses.
What happens at the end? They go in the panic room.
They all get attacked and killed, and a few of them lock themselves in a panic room while the other zombies.
That alcoholic teacher lives, which I was baffled by.
And a few zombies kind of encroach in from outside. You see them on the CCTV.
What is some of his last dialogue? It's something like "the dawn and something else, what all old men fear," or something like that. It's really like, "I don't like the light. I like the darkness. I can hide in the
morning
darkness."
and the mirror, what all old men fear.
Oh, that's it. Yes, the morning and the mirror. Fuck off. Oh my god. I hated him so much.
I think I quite liked him, actually.
Mornings and mirrors only serve to terrify old men.
Well, look, I agree. I think it's a weak film, very messy, a lot of blemishes on it. But as I say, I can watch it very happily. I don't particularly love it, but I don't hate it either. It's just kind of there for me. I give it and this is very generous, and it's a very low one of these, but I give it a 6 out of 10.
I'll go next. I really didn't like it. I think I had seen it once before because I've seen all of these Romero films once before. It might have been way back at university, something like that, and maybe I got a bit more out of this film then because I remembered liking it more than this time, which I didn't enjoy the experience of at all. I thought that the preamble sort of stuff, where it's like we're seeing like news crew sort of shots of people being taken out of a building and stuff. I thought that was quite effective up until a point. And that was probably my favourite bit of the film. Otherwise, I didn't like any of the characters. There's no drama that I'm interested in between them, and as a tense sort of gory thrill ride, it didn't work on that level either. So I think a failure. 3 out of 10 from me.
Well, I think it was poor. I think it's quite embarrassing, frankly, considering Romero's lineage. That, like you say about it being a found footage thing and like trying a new things, okay, I'll grant you that, but it's a swing and a miss, and it's a bad miss. It suffers all the problems that found footage films at their worst suffer, plus all the other problems.
Some of them.
No, all of them.
No, you're not going to get motion sickness watching this one, are you?
But though that's what I want from a found footage film, because that's what it should be. I don't want well-framed
well, that's not
shots.
all the problems.
What?
Well, one of the big problems with found footage is that it's like there's no thought put into the framing, and it's just crap, shaky camera. That's not what this is. So it's not.
But that's what I want from a found footage film, because that's what it should be.
Yeah, but that's a different. It's not all the problems. That's all I'm saying.
I don't know. You seem to be saying the exact opposite of what you say you're saying. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, the point is, it's crap. 3 out of 10.
Now you know how I feel.
I mean, come on, look. On a scale from
1 to 10, it's a 3.
Well, no. On a scale of this to Halloween 6, for example, I mean, look, it's not.
Oh,
it could be worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a 2 out of 10 or a 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
Like Halloween 6. Have you... So, Sol, you've missed one of the major films out. Fred 2, Night of the Living Fred. I mean, that came up in my research.
Which does actually, if you search for Night of the Living Dead 3D, I believe Fred 2, Night of the Living Fred comes up in the predictive search before Night of the Living Dead 3D. Actually,
is that Fred as in the squeaky voiced former famous YouTube? Oh wow,
it's the second of the trilogy, I believe, of Fred films.
Yeah.
Have you covered those on an episode?
I think Alex Winter made one.
Well, I mean, look, if you really want to get into this, you know, there's a short film out there called Night of the Living Bread, which is just someone remade. Like it's people running around a cemetery and driving, but someone off camera throwing slices of bread at them.
Quite like the sound of that. Well, what are we watching for next week, Sol?
So next week we will be picking up with Survival of the Dead. As I said before, George Romero at one point was considering a direct continuation of Diary of the Dead, but instead he inexplicably settled on a weird thing where we follow one of the characters seen very briefly in Diary of the Dead that they encounter on a story of their own. And then, of course, we will be covering the big dog, Dawn of the Dead, and its remake. 2 of the most significant zombie movies ever made.
So that is the first of our epic zombie trilogy.
Thanks for joining us, Calvin.
Oh, no, it's been lovely. I look forward to the next 2 weeks.
Sticker in the right van. Let's get out of here.